Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Safety Culture. My name's Rob, and I'm the Group CMO at Dynamic Risk Indicator, and I'll be your chair today. We'll get to introductions and the debate in a couple of minutes. We'll just let a few more people join, flying up nicely. So while everyone else logs in, let's just check in and go through a few hygiene elements. So do check your video is enabled. If connectivity is poor or experiencing lag where you are, then turn your video off and just revert to audio. You can still submit questions, but don't worry, we're recording and you'll get the replay link after the webinar. We're scheduled for 40 minutes, including Q&A and a quick 10-minute demo. It's a panel debate fueled by your questions, care of live chat and those pre-sent. So a huge thank you already for submitting such a variety and so many. It's going to be an insightful session. It's not too late to submit a question, and do please be as engaged as you can. More interaction, the better. Simply send us a question through the Q&A button, which is on the bottom. Hover over that, it will pop up and grow yellow or green. These will go to our moderator, Stephen, during, and we're going to be collating all of those questions for you. Don't forget to check in on Twitter, give us a like, and you can also send questions via DRI Safety Culture, and we'll pass those on to our panelists. Back, use the comments function, and after this event, we'll send you a link. So, thoughts, insightful, long, just right, it's all appreciated. So, on to our panelists. We've got two esteemed and seasoned panelists today to give you strategic insights, practical guidance, and helpful tips from planning to implementing your safety culture, right down into the weeds. So we've got it all covered today, so do join in, and the more interactive, the better. So, Tim, would you like to give us a quick summary intro, please?
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, my talk is really going to be about safety culture, what I think it's composed of, and how it interacts with general culture, well-being culture, mental health, and all the issues that are most current in the world of SHE.
And do you just want to give our attendees just a quick shot in the arm of your background, Tim?
My background, I ran the first behavioural safety research in Europe, really, many years ago now, 30 years ago, from Manchester University, not far from here. From behavioural safety, you find yourself working in safety leadership, of course. Safety leadership takes you to safety culture, and culture takes you to general culture and excellence. So I've written some books, done quite a lot of consultancy over the last 25 years or so around the world, but 400 organisations now I've worked with. So a lot of, I would hope, practical hands-on experience of trying to change organisation safety culture.
Fantastic, and we're giving away some of those books at the end of this session. Sterling, do you just want to give our attendees a quick summary of your background?
Yeah, sure, Rob. Hello, everyone. My name is Sterling Crew, and I've been in the food industry for 35 years. I started as a regulator, and I've worked for two big retailers and two big manufacturers and a big brand. And I'm fairly new to culture, I will tell you. So in the 35 years of doing food safety and health and safety and sustainability, culture's only kind of appeared on my radar about 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm of that new wave of people that suddenly realise it's a fantastic tool that we can use to improve our safety and health and safety standards.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sterling. So we've got two different angles coming at this, so this should be pretty interesting. So let's just give you a quick refresher of our agenda. We'll be into a view from the experts, which will be around about 10 minutes or so, 5 from each. So Tim's going to talk us through the 4 steps to a better safety culture and diving into behavioural-based safety. And then Sterling's going to tackle the challenge for organisations and getting foundations in place. Then we're into a Q&A, so all the questions that are firing through to us now and the ones that you've already submitted, we'll go through all of those and tackle this. And then into a high-level demo of our risk mitigation software, so how we can help you on a day-to-day basis. Then into our wrap and close. So I guess we really need to just tell you a little bit about DRI and who we are. If you checked out online, then a quick shot in the arm. Dynamic Risk Indicators, an award-winning SaaS provider. Our risk mitigation software enables you to control, measure and manage your organisation's health and safety. It's designed to improve visibility, productivity, expediency, but take away the headaches of managing health and safety operations and compliance. It's the only platform that can calculate an organisation's dynamic risk score, or DRS as we call it, and we're rapidly carving out a name for ourselves as the trusted measure in safety performance. A bit like NPS, but we'll get on to that later on. So now, over to Tim, who'll educate us on building a better safety culture. Tim, over to you.
Well, you'll try anyway. Well, first thing to say is I'm just going to disagree with Sterling, just to try and be contentious. I don't think safety culture is a tool. I think absolutely every organisation already has a safety culture. It's just a question of which one it's got, frankly. And in terms of safety culture itself is king, you know. I think there's a famous expression, culture eats strategy and tactics for breakfast. Absolutely true, you know. And why it's so incredibly important is your new starts, your subcontractors, anybody who turns up for the first time, what they'll do is they'll have a look at the experienced people around them and they'll follow them. So it doesn't matter how good the training is, how good the inductions are, how good your software is. If what happens on your first day of work is that you get put in a van with 3 old hands who cut corners X, Y, and Z, by the end of the first day, your new start, your subcontractor will be cutting the same corners, almost certainly. So it's incredibly pervasive and powerful, the culture. And everybody's got one, whether it's a bad one or a good one. What it's comprised of, I'll use my own model from my own books, obviously, if you would forgive me. But I think there are 3 elements. The first one, of course, is your basic systems, your procedures, your training, your inductions, your safety management system, all your software, all that good stuff. And a lot of organisations, of course, have opportunities to improve on that, and there are holes in it, quite big holes in it. But a lot of organisations hit diminishing returns with that. So they've got to a level that they've never been to before, but they kind of plateaued. And they're not going to get any better by having new systems and new procedures. Maybe new software would help, but after that, it's really about 2 things, I think. The first one is a learning culture, where we accept that error is inevitable with people around. Like the famous quote in Fleabag, isn't it? Why do pencils have rubbers on the end? Because people make mistakes. So Matthew Said's book, Black Box Thinking, covers this incredibly well. Probably the best book about safety written in the last 20 years. And it's basically that when things go wrong, just how good are we at learning that things have gone wrong, and how do we learn from it? Because error is inevitable when you push it. So I shared stage with a jockey not so long ago, who said he was the losingest jockey in all of history, with more than 14,000 defeats. He'd been paid as a professional to get on a horse and had lost 14,000 times and fallen off quite a few as well, broken every bone in his body. But of course, the kick in the tail was this is Tony McCoy, who described himself also as the winningest job in history, with more than 4,000 winners. So error, an attitude, an adult, objective, analytical approach to error is incredibly key, which takes us, of course, into the whole just culture approach, which is just a really good framework for saying, well, what's gone wrong and why has it gone wrong? Because it breaks down into two things, of course: error, unintentional error, so mistakes, lapses, slips, and so on. And obviously, at that point, what you need to do is to design the task, the job, so that error is as least likely as possible. And that's the job of participatory economics, economists, human factor specialists, and so on. And then the other side of the fence is really interesting, because the other side of the fence is where psychologists get themselves involved, because it's all about violations, and violations, of course, unsafe behaviours and healthy behaviours and productive behaviours that are intentional. So the individual in question thinks about it and then does it, pushes their fingers and cracks on. And where culture comes in, I think, is a very simple example where a CEO stands up and says, nothing is more important than safety in this organisation, but somehow leaks that that's not quite true. And that boils down to a frontline supervisor saying something along the lines of, I want you to be safe, but make sure this job is done by Friday. And what that does, it triggers the individual to think, well, I need to do this job by Friday and as safely as possible. And then corners are cut, and the famous triangle builds up, and people get hurt. So really, I think leading edge safety culture work is really all about understanding the nuances of communication and dialogue between frontline supervisors, their managers, and the people who do the work and take the risks. So I was involved in a fatality not so long ago where somebody had been supposed to stop a risk. That was their job, to spot the risk. And instead of spotting it and warning their colleagues, they stepped right in front of it and were killed by it. When we looked into it, what had happened was they had volunteered to do a double shift. They'd come in tired, work through tired, and volunteered to do a double shift. And the supervisor's response was, "Are you okay? You look a bit tired." "No, I'm fine." "Well, that's good. Crack on then. That solves the problem." And 4 hours later, the physiology of fatigue is exactly the same as the physiology of tiredness. Bang! Basically, they were walking around doing a high-risk job, drunk, essentially. So it's the nuance of communications and dialogue. It's exactly the same with mental health and well-being. If you have a supervisor who asks you if you're all right, and half a second listening to the answer, that's very, very different from somebody spending 5 seconds listening to the answer. You get much more information out of it. So for me, the absolute front line of safety culture is about the nuance, and we're talking about nudge theory here, of course, and thinking fast, thinking slow, and all that stuff about cueing people without realising you're doing it. So the classic one is, I want this job doing safely by Friday, and then we can all go to court afterwards where the supervisor says, I said safely, I very explicitly said safely, I just don't know what's gone wrong here. But it's that sort of 9 out of 10, 10 by 10 out of 10. So that, I think, is my 5 minutes up, so I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. So there's some messages within there. It's certainly about listening and understanding, communication and dialogue, and learning from your errors. It sounds simple, and you do a beautiful job of making the complex sound remarkably simple. But let's see from another perspective, and Sterling's now going to take us through some of the challenges and best practices around safety culture. Sterling.
Thank you. I echo a lot of what Rob said. A lot of my experience is based on actual practical application. I'm a scientist, so I look for the evidence base. And what the health and safety community has recognised just after Chernobyl is when every time there was an incident or an accident, when they looked at the root cause, this thing culture kept appearing. And Tim is absolutely right. Although culture in the food industry where I work is a relatively new concept, in the last 5-6 years ago, it started to become part of the zeitgeist. When I used to talk about culture, the people who used to be there were microbiologists who thought I was going to talk about something that was on a petri dish. And certainly in our industry, it's something that's very, very, very new. And some people used to come up to me and say, well, we don't do safety culture. We don't do a culture. And I'm saying, well, yes, you do. Everybody has a culture. No matter if you're the biggest organization in the world or you're the smallest organization, you have a culture, whether it's a good one or a bad one. And I think you can measure that culture on a maturity continuum, a scale, try to say, well, a poor culture would be all those negative things that Tim was talking about, poor leadership, poor training, poor staff communication, not walking the talk. And a good culture is the very opposite. And it's how do you inoculate that type of culture into a business so you can see that your performance is going up.
Yeah.
So I used to work with retailers, so they give you the opportunity to see hundreds and hundreds of factories. And some of the factories were all exactly the same. They had the same machinery, they had the same layout, because that was what GMP dictated. But if you visited a site very quickly, within almost 10 minutes, you could dictate what the culture of that site was. And it was always amazing to me that you had almost identical operations, but it is the culture and the people element that made them either a success or a failure. And so I was paid to go do risk assessment and assess factories for M&S and Tesco. And I could simply go into the toilets of a factory, and the way that they treated their staff told me everything that I was going to see later on in that visit. And never have I actually got into a factory and found a perfectly good toilet and nice staff facilities, and then a terrible factory. And every time I've gone on there, I've seen the way that the staff have been treated, their facilities, the way they were talked to. I knew what was going to be behind that factory door when I walked in. So culture has always been with us. I think it's more of a recognition now of how it can benefit us. And some of the behavioural tools that Tim alluded to, like nudge theory, we're starting to use now to get people to do the right thing. I've been a really big pusher of training throughout my whole career. But training on its own, I think, gives you a very full sense of security. Because unless training drives behavioural change, unless people do the right thing, the training is just a tick in the box. It's almost like, let's make sure we've got the right machinery, let's make sure we do the right audits, let's do the right training. And I think the great advantage and benefit for us is once we understand how to measure it, how to push it in the right direction, how to adapt people's behaviour, then we're not going to really take health and safety, or indeed food safety, to the next level. And perhaps one of the big examples of that is simply, to me, practical things like I used to work in a big factory. The most dangerous place was in the loading yard, and something as simple as to try to get people to wear high-vis jackets was a real pain. But what made it really difficult is the owner of that business, it was a family business, would insist in walking around the warehouse without a high vis. And so you could spend all your time with the workers saying, look, it's really important to you, you have to do it, consequences of not doing it. Immediately the senior management team start breaking those rules, you undermine the safety message, and you create another type of culture. And I think culture is what happens when so if I went to those warehouses during the day, most people had the high-vis jackets on, and as you walk past, you could see people, hi Sterling, how are you? Pointing to their high-vis jackets, because I was obsessed with it. It was the most dangerous area of our site. But if I went to the night shift and it was 1 o'clock in the morning, then you'd find people not doing it. And no one would ever say to me, I know that I didn't know I should be wearing it. They'd always come up with other reasons. Oh, I couldn't find one. I was in a hurry. And I think safety culture happens when you're not there. And that's why it's so important. If you have senior managers, like, people normally follow the rules. But when the managers go and it's left a few supervisors and people are left on their own on different ships, whether they're in a small catering operation or a large big company, at the end, you're still dealing with small groups. And if the culture isn't right, that I must do this and I know the reasons why, people won't follow the rules. And so that's why I use the toolbox example. is an industry used to a toolbox. If you want to do something, you pick up a tool. If it's food safety, you get out HACCP, you get out GMP. Health and safety, there are lots of great tools that you can use. Some from the HSC's laboratory has got different tools you can use to measure food safety culture. So you need something that you can practically give to someone and say, look, this is how you can influence culture. And I think that's the big buzzword at the moment, is part of the zeitgeist. People are realizing that behavioral science has created a seismic shift in the landscape of health and safety. People see by using nudge theory that you can get people to wear those vests, as an example. Simply doing things like having a mannequin at the entrance to the warehouse with a vest on reminds people as they're going in. Simple things like putting a camera at the entrance to the warehouse means that people know they're being seen, and that will affect their behavior as well. And so by using some simple behavioral nudge tools, we were able to get compliance to almost 100%. Not just when the managers are there, but at night, they're left to their own devices. So I suppose I'm a bit of an evangelist. In most of my career, I was doing culture for health and safety and food safety, but never really knew what I was doing. I didn't have a label. Plus, it seemed like good practice. And I think the great thing now is there's so many tools and measurement facilities that you've got, and there's a real appreciation how you can drive positive change by driving a positive culture. So that's my view, Rob. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Sterling. So there's a bit of a different opinion there, both valid. I mean, I sense from that what you're both saying is there needs to be this Haynes manual of do's and don'ts. There has to be training involved, which does become a bit of a tick box mentality. But then once again, when shifts are late or whatever industry, that's all out of sight, out of mind, and it's back to the same basic problems of tiredness, fatigue, not listening to people, observing what's going on. So I think a lot of these nudge theories, repeat techniques to affect behaviours make a lot of extreme sense. But I sense this is still quite a huge area that needs properly defining in any business across a wealth of sectors. We're actually starting to get some interesting questions come through now, which link into this quite well. So what I'd like to do now is just open this out and kick off with some questions that have come in. Obviously, everyone keep sending me questions in. Use that question icon. We'll cover off as many as we can today. The ones we can't, we'll summarise in FAQs blog and get that out to you. So we've been grouping some of these questions, going along and classifying them. And one of the big ones, which sounds daft, but it isn't, but to both of you, but what actually is health and safety culture? And let's go to you first, Tim.
Sure. Well, to boil it down, I mean, I agree, of course, with Sterling, everything he said. For me, health and safety culture is you've had diminishing returns with your systems, your procedures, all the technical stuff that you can do. The learning stuff I try to cover, you know, that there's a very mature approach to error and the management of error and risk. You know, so it's the bow tie effect of try and make sure it doesn't happen. It's going to happen, so make sure you've got good capacity to make sure it doesn't cause too much damage when it does. HSG 48, of course. And the key elements of that you can measure around issues like dialogue. How good is the dialogue? How good is the communication? And all that felt leadership, transformational leadership issues. So you can measure how well you learn. You can measure how often managers are not following their own principles. As Sterling said, it can be a disaster if they ever do that. But on a more positive side, you can talk about how well are they communicating? How well are they listening? How good is the dialogue? Are they coaching rather than telling? Are they praising rather than criticizing? All the stuff that creates and builds a strong culture. So you can measure that because you can talk to the front line and say how often do these sorts of things happen. So you can get a good idea of just how strong and vibrant the culture is simply by measuring it with simple questions.
Yeah.
Always, sometimes, never, that sort of thing, around those issues.
Sure. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and Sterling. So, how would you describe what a health and safety culture actually is? If we had to pin on a definition for people.
Yeah, because that's the most often used question. Yeah, but exactly what is culture? It is a difficult thing to describe. I mean, the HSC have got a very long definition of it that even if you read it 4 or 5 times, it's really difficult to understand. You almost have to have the academic. It's about group dynamics, the way that people interact as common values. But simply to me, when people ask me more on the shop floor, I'm just saying it's normally the unwritten rules in an organisation. It's the things you don't see written down in normal practice, or as other people have said, it's what we do around here. I mean, that's what culture is. It's just the way that people behave. It is hard to get the theory of it across because so much of the language of behavioural science is based in academia. But really, it's the way that people behave. And sometimes people talk about a climate of safety and a safety culture and get the two sometimes mixed up. And a great analogy is almost an iceberg. Everyone uses an iceberg for every analogy. And the top bit you can see is almost the climate. It's the things that you can see that's going on around safety. And culture is more that under part of it, of the organisation, when you look at health and safety. It's almost hard to see. And most people in an organisation don't see. And it is those unwritten ways that people behave and why they do things. And it is a difficult thing to measure, but there are tools. And it is a difficult thing to develop, but the rewards are enormous if you can get it right. It works.
Yeah.
A good example of culture was Volkswagen and the cheating that they did on their cars that were being exported to America. I mean, there was a culture there of excellence in the world's largest car manufacturer. But to pick up on what Tim said earlier, all the guys were there, and their instruction was, "You've got to pass this emission standard." So they didn't sit there and think they got to pass it safely. They just passed the emission standards, and that said something about the culture of a company. But you're told to do something, and you do it without thinking. Well, really, the underlying value of the company is, and we should think of our customers and be safe.
And you both mentioned within there about measurements. Sterling, how do you measure it?
So there are lots of tools that you can use. The HSE have got them, so they will take you through things you can do. But I had really, really simple measures. So I had my own personal measures. You could get organisations to come outside and audit it. And there are the traditional measures we use for safety, like accident reporting and near misses and incidents. But to me, I used to try to pick on one thing. So it could be as simple as I mentioned with the vest. For me, my personal mission was, if I could get people to wear the vest each and every time, that was an indicator to me that we had very poor uses of the vest. And by using some of these cultural tools and nudge it, we're able people to use the vest better. And that almost, to me, was a really simple way of, I could walk around a warehouse and instantly know if the culture was moving in the right direction or the wrong direction. But there are lots of maturity tools that you can use that will measure different facets of culture. So there are a lot of things as well as health and safety.
And Tim, where do you think, there's another one from our attendees, where does a safety culture start?
Oh, well, at the top, the most obvious example of a slightly dodgy safety culture would be the CEO who says on the annual safety day, nothing is more important than what we're going to discuss today. And then nips out the side doors just after they've got off the stage, rationalizing that nobody will notice, and even if they do, it's not important, and that everybody notices, and it is important. And it starts there, pretty much.
And I guess Sterling, you'd endorse that, but it links into another one. Do you have some practical tips on where to start from the top down?
I think Tim's absolutely right. It's not a bottom-up process, absolutely. Although small teams can have great cultures they develop themselves, unless the person, the senior management team and the CEO walk the talk and set the standards, you've got no chance at all. All they'll do is keep undermining the work that middle management and supervisors are trying to do. And as Tim said, a lot of it is how much time are those people going to give to health and safety? His example of a CEO, leaving the stage halfway through, perhaps a discussion. Yeah. So often you turn up to organisations and health and safety, you don't see the CEO there at all. I also used to know, as a visitor, when I used to visit lots of sites, if the CEO of that company was there when I visited, it told you something about that company. If he was too busy doing something else, or some of the other senior management team were there, instantly you knew exactly what their attitude was to safety.
Okay. We got another one in. Just if we can expand on it, but you often say good health and safety culture kicks in when no management are around. What do you mean by that, Sterling?
Well, you know me, Rob, I'm a big, ugly guy. And if I stand over, we use the vest example just to do it. If I stand by that warehouse door of people going in, and people are going in, everyone picks up a vest and puts it on. And they look at me and say, look, Sterling, I've got my vest on. Yeah, look at this. Even when we had the cameras there, people looking up at the cameras, you could see them almost saying, look, I've got my vest on, looking up to the camera. But when there's no one there, when there's no visibility, that's when company values start to appear. When you start to do the right thing, you haven't got someone telling you to do it. It's the culture of the business is one of, I should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's especially true of smaller catering operations. A lot of them are 24 hours. You don't often have senior management on site. They're normally self-managing. And everyone will do the right thing when there's someone big and ugly and a boss over. But when they go, that's when the values of the company really are tested. Are people going to do the right thing, or are they going to get dragged off to something else they think is more important?
Okay, thanks, Tony. Got another one, Tim. What is safety differently, and how different is it really?
I'd say safety differently is obviously based on the book by Sidney Dekker and Holnagel's original book on types 1 and 2. I would argue that anybody who read Sidney's earlier books, like Field Guide to Human Error and so on, would already have been doing safety differently in terms of really focusing on dialogue, empowerment. We talked a little bit before about it being, it has to be top down, but as people like Dom Cooper would say, it has to be excellent. It has to be top down. That's a given, but it also has to be bottom up. And so all the things that Safety Differently mantras, they're very good on the catchphrases. So things like blame makes error a choice. The front line are not just all the problems, but that's where all the solutions are. Quality of dialogue is absolutely key. All those things I absolutely agree with. And the whole principle of, because obviously my thing is learning and dialogue. So that's basically the central tenet of the Safety Differently approach. So I couldn't agree with it more. But I've been agreeing with it. Couldn't agree with it more for about 25 years now. So I'd argue it's not spectacularly new, really. But
Yeah. And indeed, blame makes error a choice was actually one of our questions within here, so rather pertinent. Another one, do you think it's true we've gone from shouting about safety to more whispering about it?
Oh, if I can jump in, sorry, Sterling. That's the thing where we said we've been shouting safety for years, but whispering health. And recently we've been starting to shout about health too. That's the question you probably got in front of you there.
Yeah,
is absolutely true.
I might have got that slightly wrong, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. 80% of the work that I do these days is about well-being and its impact on mental health. And organisations who are addressing that, as a rule, they're talking about it. Everybody's talking about it, but the ones who are doing something about it have made and accepted the link, as we did with safety. That actually, if you've got mental health problems in your workforce, if you're not doing something constructive about it, it's a huge opportunity missed. Because you've got mistakes being made, you've got presenteeism, absenteeism, your best people leaving, accidents occurring to people who are tired and under pressure and so on.
Yeah.
And absolutely no discretionary effort happening for people who are hanging on by a thread. So all the work that's being done with the shouting of health is to an extent motivated by good old-fashioned win-win thinking.
Yeah, and that brings us on to the next session. We've grouped quite a lot of questions into well-being and behavioural safety. And there's quite a few have been coming in around mental health. There's one here for you, Tim. Why are mental health first aiders proving controversial?
Because like good old-fashioned behavioural safety, when it wasn't done very well, because it was all focused on the individual, not the root causes of why unsafe behaviours were occurring, some organisations are training up lots of mental health first aiders and saying, there we go, we've got mental health covered. There's lots of mental health first aiders out there. But the problem is, if you imagine Lambourne Steelworks, which I'd experienced a lot of 30 years ago or so, you've got forklift trucks bombing up and down, you've got hot metal flying around, and you say, don't worry, Mrs. Jones, because Steve over there, he's a really good first aider, so nothing to worry about. I think it's exactly the same with mental health. If you have mental health first aiders who are carrying a lot of weight and getting stuck in best they can, but you have an organisation with huge amounts of stresses on the workforce, so the frontline supervisors have no emotional intelligence at all and dysfunctional, where work-life balance is awful, where all the leading people are 12-hour days and kind of assuming everybody else better follow their lead, etc., and all the massive structural stresses in work. So, the famous expression, good work is good for you, but bad work is bad for you. So if you're giving them bad work, so they don't know where their task fits in, they haven't got enough control or they've got too much and so on, then mental health first aiders are not going to help you a lot, frankly.
Yeah, and I've heard coined, which has been sent again, get your well-being right and 80% of your behavioural problems will take care of themselves. Why is that valid, Tim?
Because if you we know that we're going to spend 10% of the time away with the fairies on any given day because the human brain is easily tired and so on. And at that time, there's going to be lots of risk because you're going to be distracted, you're going to make mistakes and so on. If you've got poor well-being, that 10% is probably going to be more like 30 or 40% of your day as you hanging by a thread and trying to get to 5 o'clock. If you're getting it right and people are switched on and alert and having good days, then it's going to be near that 10% that's inevitable. And really impacting on that, if you've got people who are having a good day rather than having a bad day, they're just going to have fewer accidents. They're going to say fewer stupid, provocative things. They're going to make fewer bad decisions. They're going to make fewer stupid decisions that impact on their colleagues by saying, just crack on with it, or this should suffice, and so on. So, everybody switched on having a good day. A lot of things just take care of themselves.
Okay. We've got another one here. Obviously, mental health is very big in the media at the moment, with Mental Health Week just passed. But why are attempts to make mental health first aiders compulsory being met by shrugs from experts in the field?
I just answered that one.
Yeah, but do you think that's more around true lack of expertise within there?
No, I think there's a lot of fantastic work being done in that field, great training from all sorts of people. But we think, I'm sure Sterling would agree, that that is just a small element of a holistic approach. You need a properly holistic, thorough approach to the causes of stress in work, not band-aids. So great. If it's compulsory, well, that doesn't hurt, but it's not going to get us very far. I mean, if you're thinking in the baseball analogy, so that will get us to first base. What about the other three?
Yeah,
so
sure.
hence the, doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Okay. There's another one coming. Can you give us a few examples of how budget theory applies to safety?
Well, behavioural science is a critical part of health and safety, and for food safety, that matter. If you want to change people's behaviour, there are some things you can do just to nudge them to do the right thing. A couple of examples could be in Denmark. What they're doing now, they're painting 3D zebra crossings. So as you come around the corner, it looks like the zebra crossings are actually blocks in the road, not painted 2D on the surface. And people naturally slow down because they think that there's a concrete block in front of them. So simply by nudging them, you can make them change their behaviour. There's lots of practical applications. We had a problem, as lots of people do in factories, with men's toilets, and the floors normally are awash with urine, and our slips, trips and falls in that area were terrible. And so we are trying to get people not to use the urinals properly. And what we do is use nudge theory. We simply painted little flies on each one of the urinals. And as people were going on to use the urinals, they were aiming at the fly and therefore were aiming across the floor. So we almost cured a problem of slips, trips and falls by just modifying people's behaviour with a little nudge.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Tim and Sterling. So lastly, one for you both. And this one's really more about developing the culture of safety. There are various ways of assessing safety culture. And really it's about which one do you recommend and why. So, for example, we say attitude surveys, safety management audits, safety culture workshops, and then, of course, leading and lagging safety performance indicators. The question is really, which do you recommend and why?
So I used to be audited all the time by lots of different people, but the one that was always the most interesting was the ethical audit, because it told me more about the culture of my company. So you could have BRC and HACCP audits and safety audits, but they used to come in and take a spectrum of people, 40 people from the factory, and interview them on a one-to-one basis. So you're getting positive, real feedback. You never knew who said what. And that was a way of getting totally unfiltered feedback from the staff. And that, to me, was my greatest measure of culture. What did they think of the senior management team? Were they really committed? How committed were they to their job? Did they have enough time to do their job properly? And that was the audit that I always used to worry about the most, and also used to spend the most time thinking about. It really gave you an insight into your company, really that bottom part of the iceberg that you don't see in your day-to-day life. I would thoroughly recommend that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree with Sterling. I mean, you can get lots of safety climate surveys online and so on. They're easy to use, but the error variance is considerable. So it's very difficult to know if you've got better because you can't compare. So a good safety culture survey based on Parker and Hudson's model, which is basically a reactive, compliant, proactive, and looking at things like learning and leadership and so on. So it's like a 3x5 matrix really, with questions to people in a room. 6 people around the table. Here are some statements that may or not be true about some facets of safety culture. Just tell us what you think, and obviously the key thing is to make sure that's anonymous so that they trust you. And I don't even know, I don't want to know who you are or what your names are. And then there'll be the compulsory don't tell them pike jokes. And once they've got that out of the way, we get some really interesting and rich feedback and some comments and some observations and anecdotes. And it's always in the anecdotes, you know. I remember I was on a platform once, on an oil platform, 20 years ago, and someone said, "Oh, we have no name, no blame on this platform. It's just that people love to know who it is they're not blaming."
Okay.
One really.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm just conscious of time. We've still got questions coming in, and we'll have to circle back to those and fire those out through our FAQs. Just looking for a sort of quick 60-second summary from you both. Just some closing comments, please. Tim.
Safety culture, everybody's got one. It's all about learning. It's all about leadership. The elements of leadership are leading by example, coaching, praise, communication. If you're doing that well, it's all about dialogue. And the key question, it all boils down to this. If I ask one question, I think from safety differently again, actually, to what extent are the people who are in charge of the management of the risk, to what extent are they saying to people, I know you want to work quickly and productively, and I know you want to work safely, of course. What do you need? What do you need from me to do that? And if you've got that going well, you won't be going far wrong.
And Sterling?
I'd echo what Tim says there, wise words. I'd say have an appreciation of behavioural science. So they have something called optimistic bias, where people think, you know, it won't happen to me, I'm doing the right thing. An illusion of control, which is, I know what I'm doing. And I think we're all people, and we all start to think if nothing's gone wrong, then nothing will go wrong, and accidents happen to somebody else, prosecutions happen to somebody else. And I think that's the biggest failing that we've got in organisations. You assume that things are going to go wrong elsewhere, and you assume you know what you're doing. And once you're in that position of thinking, I know what I'm doing, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Perfect. Thanks, both. So, I mean, clearly there's change from the top down at C-suite level that's required, needs to be driven by there. But I sense there's a much greater ownership in the middle at senior management level, with accountability everywhere being integral to success. There's some good outtakes from that, and thank you both very much. We'll come back to you in a moment, but now I just want to quickly move on to how we can help with a demo. So there's clearly many tasks to consider for all organisations, large and small, to track, to manage, to control. It would, of course, be remiss of me not to mention how we can help and support you with our technology. So I'd like to introduce and hand you straight over to our Chief Customer Officer, Carl Sandland, who's going to take you through a brief, high-level tour of the core functionality and benefits of our risk mitigation software. You can do much more, but we're just trying to focus in on today's discussion. Oh, are you there?
I certainly am. Good morning, and thanks for the introduction there. And thank you to Sterling and Tim for I guess, the segue into how we could look at safety culture and behavioural safety within the system. So I guess for those people who haven't seen the system before, very quickly, what we're trying to do is take sort of all aspects and all disciplines of health safety, food safety, and bring those into a central hub, whereby at a board level, a manager level, and a user location site level, you can look at all of your areas of risk based on various activities that can be taken through the different modules. So that all sounds like a little bit of a mouthful. Let me explain in a little bit more detail. So there's this overall status, which is looking at my entire estate. So I'm looking here as if I'm looking across a multi-location business. In fact, it's looking at, I think in this site we've got probably about 15 different locations set up. And it's looking at all of those disciplines and areas. So it's looking at, where are we up to from an audit point of view? And again, I'll go into a couple of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. How are we looking from a fire perspective? from tracking legislative certificates against assets, where we're up to with training records, and so on and so on. And all of that feeds back through an algorithm to give us this red, amber, green, and to tell us where our problems are, where our risk areas are, which is really important from, I guess, from a behavioural point of view, because the board needs to accept that there is an element of risk, and that risk is spread across multiple areas, across those multiple locations. And furthermore, I mean, from a location point of view, so if I was to, for example, simulate logging in now to the Manchester bar and restaurant location, so it's looking at my overall status now purely based, it's dynamically updating that purely on where the risk areas are for Manchester. So again, I can now, as the site owner or location, I can look at that and look at where my particular areas of risk are, which is going to be different than the entire group. So as I said, lots of modules feeding back into that central place and really identifying where those issues are. So let's take a moment to look at how we improve those, because that's another key thing. You know, we need to provide visibility. We need to, I guess, remove fear of reporting things and noting those down. But we also need to empower people to be able to self-manage and make a difference to those things, because that's where that culture is then going to change. It goes from being a poor culture where nobody accepts responsibility and accountability for making change to a good culture. So in that, let's have a look at the audit. So I can see here that some audits have been performed, that there's a critical priority action against this Manchester location. So I absolutely want to change that. You know, almost looking at it from a gamification point of view, I want to make that red a green. So I can go in and I can see where that particular critical action was, and what it was. It was a non-conformance logged during a particular audit that took place on a particular date, suggesting that visitors and contractors were not told to sign in. So that's critical. I mean, that's certainly something that needs to be looked at. So if I then go and look at the history of this, and go and look at the audits, go and look at the audit that was taken out in Manchester. So I have a full audit report, and this at the moment is just showing me the outputs, the things I need to change. If I actually look at the full report itself, which is quite lengthy. Sorry, that's not loaded up properly. There we go. We can see it's many pages. There was lots and lots of criteria within that audit that, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail at the moment, because what I want to concentrate on here is correcting the things that need to be looked at. So we can see here that managing visitors and contractors, which is a particular section in this audit, it was logged as a non-conformance. Now, I, as a location manager, I can impact that change. So I can go in and I can see what the problem was. I may, for example, now have implemented the signing in and signing out book. It may be digital, it may be paper-based, but as far as I'm concerned, I have now closed that option off. And I might obviously be able to put a little bit more detail in than I have done there. And update the status. So it's now showing us closed. My audit status, I mean, my audit score is never changed. That is marked down in history as being, that is the score that location achieved at that time. However, what it has now done is, if I can now go back to my dashboard, at the overall status, it's now dropped the critical actions down by 1. And if I look at Manchester, I've now gone from red to a green. So it gives me that power to actually go in and impact a change. So if we're thinking at it from an audit point of view, where you've got your frequency-based audits, that's very much, I guess, it comes from above. We're checking where we stand from a legislative point, from a safety point of view. And during those audits, there will be non-conformances logged. We're then passing those tools over to the different locations so that they can then make a change to those. they can close off the actions, they can make their site green. And if everybody makes their site green and accepts responsibility across all of these modules, then the board's going to be happy, because as far as the board's concerned, the overall status then for the entire group of companies or locations is operating at a very low risk. And at a C-suite level, board level, that's exactly what we all want. So just one more very quick thing that I'll jump into. Again, this isn't a demonstration of the entire suite, but one thing I do want to look at specifically is monitoring, so checklists. So I've mentioned there about audits, which is very much the case of, I guess it's the reactive, giving the power to people to react to problems that were found during an audit. Whereas, you know, what we actually want is, from a safety culture point of view, we want people to take accountability for being proactive. You know, what can you do? What can you observe, and what can you do to make things better now, so that when things are audited, there's actually less non-conformances found. So monitoring or checklists, it enables people with the permissions to actually set up their checklists or to use the ones that are there. So again, I'm going to look at my Manchester location. So I'm simulating being logged in now as one of my Manchester operatives. And you can see that from above, there's these particular checklists that have already been set up for me. There's some that I can log against, there's some that I can't. So it's the system's actually guiding and controlling what you should do and when. So going back to old paper-based records where you've got a clip chart full of different surveys, can I do it now? Should I do it now? Shouldn't I? You know, could I actually go home and do it while I'm sat watching Coronation Street? You know, it removes all of that. It controls when you can do things. And then if I want to start looking at some of these and logging checks, it's as simple as going in. It will control whether I can do it or not, and then I just log against those. Now, logging against these is great. Again, it comes from the top, but the real power comes into, again, I'm a site location. I'm looking at the things that are mandated from the top that need to be logged. But wouldn't it be better if I could create my own checklist? I've noticed some gaps. I've noticed some areas where I think that if I start checking this on this location, and then perhaps suggest that up to above, then that becomes another checklist program that's pushed out. So, and managing checklists is so easy. So it's as simple as going in. I can create a checklist. I can select what frequency, and I can have lots of different frequencies. I'm going to say that this is something that I want to do daily. You can then create sections, and within sections you can have different types of questions. So this is just I'm just going to call this section 1 for speed. And then you can add different questions in. So this particular question is, have you checked the fire exits at 8 a.m. today? It's a mandatory question. I could add help text in, and then I've got a whole list of different types of questions I can use. Now, traditionally, survey type-based checks are just going to be pass, fail, and A. But we've taken the system a lot further, so you can have a lot more interactability now with it. So maybe what I should be asking is, rather than have you check the fire exits, it's more a case of, what were your findings checking the exits? And then we can start giving people some controlled answers to perhaps select from a drop-down, and then we can add the answers in that are perhaps all good, all clear. Add another option in. No, less than 50% blocked, and so on and so on. So I can control all of these different answers. And this gives us a little bit more accountability, responsibility, and it takes us away from this whole just answer yes, no, or not applicable. It gets us to think more. It gets us to observe more. And through managing a checklist like this and creating a checklist ourselves, it gets us to play with what we can do on recording. And again, empowering our location managers to be able to do that, I think, is a really powerful thing. And then we can schedule which days we want it to happen. We can limit, if we want, when in the day that it happens. So this particular check must always be done between 8:30, so let's say, and 9:30. And then we can assign it out to the whole of Europe, just United Kingdom, or specific locations. So it's about, again, what we're trying to do with this tool is provide people with the visibility, remove the fear of doing things. We want you to record. We want you to think about what it is you can do to accept ownership and to really start putting some proactive management of risk into the system.
Okay,
Again,
that's fantastic.
So as I say, I could go into lots of other modules, and there will be some other webinars where we can take people through different modules. But I think what I'm trying to do there is tie some of this functionality back into what both Sterling and Tim spoke about.
Perfect. Thanks, Carl. And I think from that you can clearly see how that links back into some of the aspects and scale of task management that we've been discussing earlier today. That's raised a raft of questions from our attendees, Carl. So principally around our software capability and can you customize it? Yes, of course you can. Best way through that, let's just arrange a demo for you. We'll ping you out a few links. Just wrap up now. It's been a really great session. I think Carl's hit the nail on the head around proactive accountability and taking ownership. That helps us as we track down through the levels of different management from C-suite. I think there's a hell of a lot that could be picked up around nudge theories into repeat techniques and how to affect behaviours. But, you know, there's also a lot of common sense to be taken up. So a big thank you to our panellists, Tim and Sterling, and of course, Carl. Just a reminder, we'll forward the replay, so that's the recording on Monday morning. The FAQs from all the questions that we haven't had a chance to answer, and a link for some feedback. So we'll also contact by separate cover the winners of Tim's books directly. And do watch out for our next webinars, and don't forget to give us a like and a mention on social if you haven't already. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.